Yeah.
Where's my teacher voice?
Your costume.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, Dan, I have a huge startle reflex, and the next time that could result in a major shriek.
All right. Inside voice from my teacher voice, and Dan took care of. All right, let's go ahead. We only have a couple projects left, and I don't think that some of these will be interesting to see where we kind of land. So we, small groups. Yeah, small group spaces. Look at that. That looked like it was kind of we're right in the middle. What questions do we have about small group spaces? Maybe I was wondering exactly, how many small group spaces are we talking about? And, is this for one building? Is it for 100 buildings? What kind of dollars were we tying to this? What does this look like?
Ball's full.
We were sort of chuckling because I think this is the one where I think everyone may have taken that somewhere completely different.
That's what I wondered.
So, I mean, that's, I think, part of the discussion for you all. So we had something in the 2023 referendum, which enabled us, back to our conversation of Northside schools, try to reconfigure some of those spaces for those gates, for those help rooms. We had decided at the time that multipurpose room was a standard. So if we were going to add it at Forest High School, we should add one at West Fargo High School. So that was also as part of the overall package. So, and I had a lot of those subspecialties, and it also had its own board. And so I think the general consensus was having more diverse spaces standardized across the district is probably the best summary I could share from what I heard from stakeholders. And that could range from, we want to break down some big classrooms and make them slightly smaller in some of our Northside schools, to we want to add these multi-purpose rooms and do all of these other things. So I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this one and not a very clear scope.
Yep. Observations about like the FTLA phases that we have in the secondary that we're now starting to get at the elementary level, and all schools have something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think I really hit it on the head with just diverse types of spaces at all sites.
I think that was part of my problem. I didn't even know exactly what that meant or what we're looking at for scope. So how do you tie a dollar amount when you don't know exactly? And does this or does not include the original 2023, when we were talking about putting over $1 million into the multi-purpose space at the high school? Because that wasn't really talked about much.
Well, and since this was more along the lines, just like how the accessible playgrounds conversation grew when talking about the task force, so too did this. So we really aren't sure either what all we would like it to include. So I think that's probably where you guys would want to spend your time talking about, like, what are those things that are important and of value to you guys, to the board, and then we can kind of scope from there. But we don't really have
I don't know that I heard anything that wasn't covered under the renovations and expansions portion of the 2023 bond referendum, with the exception of the expanded scope of the inclusive playgrounds like we've talked about. I mean, I think there was a lot of diverse spaces and standardization sort of across the district. I don't know, Heather or Beth, or if anyone else heard of anything else that wasn't. That whole bucket encapsulated a lot of things in 2023 and was over $11 million. But it accomplished a lot of things. So multi-purpose rooms for West Fargo High School at Forest High School. We put the inclusive playground for the early childhood center in there. Special education improvements were also lumped in there. The restroom renovations and the sort of class space, diversity, small group spaces within the older elementaries were sort of all included in
In an $11 million price tag?
the 11.2 million.
Yeah, and then that brings me back to the first task force, right? Where you talked about black box.
Yes, that was huge from the learners.
Some of that did come out in the staff surveys as well. Those same kinds of items, and specifically the multi-purpose room.
As
As a multi-purpose room, it's interesting that they're all lumped together, but small group is on here. We have the improvements of special education. We have flexible seating. We had the preschool, but
we didn't have the multi-purpose room at the high school listed separately from all of these, so it didn't really feel like it fit into any of those. And
And the West Fargo High School is not, I mean, there aren't a lot of collaborative spaces. Their lockers take up a huge chunk of space that is not being used at all. But as far as the learners having access to collaborative areas like the other two schools, they're not even close. It's, teachers can't just, the educators can't send learners out in the hallway and keep an eye on them easily, and it leads to issues. So if we're looking at equity and making sure that our older buildings are meeting the same advanced standards of education, we've got a major deficit at.
But did we have this conversation in the last 3 to 6 months when we had all these meetings? Because was that one of the 9 that somebody talked about that I didn't know they talked about? Because it was in the first bond rec from 2023, but was it in the last 3 months? Was the multipurpose room at the high school even discussed once?
It did get a lot of energy at the task force level. And so it would have been kind of lumped into the, if you have other ideas. into
Right,
the-
and that's what this one is so tough is that I think people assume different things about what this meant, so I don't know that we know definitively what percentage expected it to mean. Is it this sort of general renovations, in subpopulation spaces was, I think, a generated summary of a lot of different ideas as a way to try to have some boards for discussion.
The learner advisory board was pretty vocal about the black
But
box.
did you talk about it, Levi, though, in your group? And did they come up
There was
with all?
one board that,
Yeah, this is on the boards, it was referred to as accommodating specialized subpopulations at every site. So who had that?
That was
board?
Vincent.
No.
no,
No,
Vincent.
you had restrooms and
Was it,
Rachel and John?
I just said we didn't have that either.
was it Andrew? Did Andrew have that?
No,
Or Andrew?
I was with her in the preschool and the,
I'm just surprised that I didn't hear this once in all the conversation. Not one time did the multi-purpose room come back in any of the discussions with either of the groups. when we-
Well, did the black boxes either?
No.
no, and that's where I think this one, so tricky. I mean, we can go back and look who had those boards. I had everything else, like all of the other generated
It was near Patricia.
topics.
Accommodating specialized pops was the second project in the board with the accessible.
I didn't
playgrounds.
even put it under that category because I don't think
Multi-purpose rooms, not
it's
specialized.
not it's not a specialized population.
Yeah.
I think that is special ed. I would think that is
yes,
arts. I would think that is something other than a general population. So when I all of a sudden it's like, I never even had one conversation since last fall about this particular topic.
I thought some of those were just, excuse me, but I thought some of those were just off the table from the first round in a way. I guess some of those specialized spaces, but.
Nothing was off the table in facility planning 2.0.
Mhm.
But as we generated the comments and the feedback and the notes, those didn't rise to that next level.
Right.
But which was to be caught in the next iteration of feedback. So we have feedback from our staff surveys. And I think we got some comments in the forums. Is that correct?
But not very many though. I think they kind of forgot about it.
No, I think that's true. And that's sort of back to, I think everyone read this one a little bit differently. So, well, because there wasn't a lot of feedback, this one, I think it's the latest of all.
I think that's why I didn't either here in the district groups. They didn't really know exactly what the small group spaces were supposed to be. And what that looked like is that scope compared to having a multi-purpose room in spaces at the high school. I think you're right, Tricia. That's
because we were describing it to stakeholders as serving special populations, like, and accommodating for special education in other classrooms. It was not ever described.
Correct. It was the small group spaces, the FTLAs, those ability to have your small group of people. The multi-purpose rooms was a project that was included on Levi's board of miscellaneous projects. Because again, kind of to what Beth said, it didn't rise to the top, so it's facility planning, but we didn't want to lose sight of it either. So those two things were separate in terms of the conversations that we were having at the forums. multipurpose rooms were not part of accommodating specialized subpopulation.
That's correct. I think we all agree with that.
The specialized
Yes,
subpopulations, like specialized, I was thinking more like the general ed classrooms, just breakout areas, that common area for a pod.
Correct.
You see that when I visit the elementary schools on the north side, they really are envious of what our
Yeah,
newer schools are.
Right, yeah.
Like
And the middle
Park.
schools too.
So tell me then, let me go back again. I still don't know what this is. So when we ask for small group spaces and you ask us if we're in support of, what am I in support of? And what does that look like? And how many rooms are we talking about? How many buildings? What exactly does that mean?
So what the conversation was at the task force was probably more looking at the elementary level, I would say, to ensure that they have those breakout spaces. And Dr. Agri, you could maybe speak more succinctly than I could about what specifically those spaces are, but I know they talked about small group rooms at the elementary, those FTLA or breakout spaces, similar to what we have at the secondary spaces to be able to bring classrooms out. But it was those types of things.
So
As Andrea was
which group is
presenting,
talking about that.
Trisha and
I was there with her at every single one. And it was just, we were talking about, Andrea would bring up that it was taking maybe one or two classrooms, dividing them so that you can have, serve like occupational therapy, speech therapy, possibly have breakouts for like the pull-out services in reading and math maybe. But it was never discussed as far as like a pod, you know, where a teacher needs more room for kids to work on a project and it's a space like that. That part never made the discussion. It was always to accommodate special ed populations
So there's
or special interventions. Yep.
There's the confusion. So how many schools currently can't count South because we already got South covered. What other ones don't have breakout pods at all?
Well, West Fargo High,
The high
West Fargo
school.
High.
that, where else? And we talked in the bond about West Fargo High only.
Like West Side, the prime example of the room that's split up with all those cubicles. They don't have a reading intervention room. SLP sometimes is in a pod group. You know,
The same-
that's the whole component of that operational versus math at the elementary level, where we're dividing rooms up.
So you do have a space. It's just not a.
It's taking away from their capacity, but yeah, and it's a different level of privacy or confidentiality.
So if you have money to do this, what would look differently at West Side then, Rachel? Because you have a room. What would this dollars do for West Side in that capacity?
I don't know at West Side specifically. That's a good question. If there was a renovation of like building walls in or adding to there, I mean, back to the conversation of the north side, if it expanded, and West Side's a great example because we actually could build onto that building, you could repurpose some of those large group spaces that are currently be utilized for small group instruction and build in some small intervention rooms. And then you could increase your capacity.
So
of that
outside of
building.
intervention, then we're talking about pods outside of intervention. Which schools don't have that besides some? Because they're in the vestibule.
I think it's easier in elementary to say who has it.
Who has it? Well, and the north side, who,
So in 2023, within sort of the scope on the elementary side specifically, we used Deer Creek as our basis of design and analyzed the square footage of the OTPT room, there's a council room, a psych room, sort of what are all of the traditional classroom spaces and all of the smaller, more functional spaces. So using that as sort of our basis, there is about 4,300 square feet of small group space in Deer Creek Elementary.
Does that include though, because especially if we're talking about the breakout pod, that's kind of confusing that like in each wing, there is that, at Deer Creek, there's that large space. So that is like the breakout room. That's not for one.
Like Willow Park has as well, but Deer Creek also has a level that a lot of the buildings want.
But do you think that number included both
It
of
did
those?
not. So actually,
different
you're reading
things?
my mind, the next line under that. So the total of 17 small group rooms in terms of square footage, which range from YMCA storage to the counselor's office,
Mhm.
was 4,250 feet. And then there are the 3 breakout spaces at 350 square feet each in each of the pods. So 1,050 feet for this. So you add those together, you're looking at 5,300 square feet in non-traditional put your teacher here and your 20, 3 learners there. And so what YHR did was they did an analysis of sort of our operational capacity. And looked at all the elementary schools. They could not get breakout spaces added without doing additions. But with some renovations at Eastwood, Berger, and South, and West Side, they thought that they could get close to nearing the square footage for the small group spaces. But we didn't even bring it at that time to the full group because to do an addition just for breakout spaces felt sort of cost prohibitive. Osgood did need a small expansion to make their square footage needs sufficient. So they were actually the only school that would physically need an actual addition. So it has it sort of broken out here by school. So West Side was remodeling, doing a physical remodel of space to make those sizes appropriate and consistent with the other elementary. So they went just school by school, sort of related to that basis of design, and all of that.
Take into account though that the number of students at all the schools in the north side are about a third of what they are at Deer Creek. They're a third. They're 300 and some compared to 500.
Oh, Deer Creek, yeah.
They'll be at next year.
Next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't be, it will be pretty comparable.
Yeah.
Starting next year.
So the reason we're asking for this is that you look at Deer Creek, then we're just trying to make it more equal to Deer Creek, but they have the space, just not utilizing it the exact same way Deer Creek is. So it might be missing some walls.
So I think what YHR told us was that, we were also trying to keep costs in mind also, that we could do some wall reconfigurations and try to get some of the small group spaces accomplished with existing square footage, but it would be a substantially larger undertaking to create sort of breakout or open concept spaces. And you could probably pick one or the other, but we were converting some classrooms into small group spaces. You could try to knock down some of the walls and turn those areas into more flexible use if you wanted. But they were just basically looking at how much space is not needed for instructional right now that could be repurposed, like we're sort of already doing, just with FF&E and in non-permanent ways. So.
Okay, so if we're using Deer Creek as a model with 5,300 square feet of collaborative space, basically, right?
Yep.
That's essentially what we're saying is our ideal, right?
Yep.
So just curious, where do those numbers come from as far as identifying that amount of square feet is it?
I think our basis of design for our elementary schools have evolved modestly over time, but Aurora is not all that different from Deer Creek. We've sort of chopped things off and moved them around. So I would say largely some precedent, based on sort of what the best practices were when we started our periods of rapid growth in 2008, more or less, and just the fact that we have things like school psychologists like we didn't have, which requires more office space. So sort of our program is also has also evolved.
So the FTLAs are social workers, our behavioral health and wellness are.
So back when Aurora and Freedom got too full and we moved 8th, 5th grades to Liberty, they all got to experience an FTLA and then they wanted.
Yeah,
That's what happened.
there's a want and a need.
At Deer Creek, 3 of those 17 small groups rooms are the small group break rooms that they have. So instead of learners going all the way down the hallway when they're having an issue, have an opportunity to keep their integrity and privacy, and it's managed in the wing. And that has been a very big desire of our principals. And I'd say our data really supports that is best for kids. And that's 3 of those rooms that are not instructional, but they're really critical spaces.
But if we need them for instructional, we could make them instructional though and take those rooms away.
They could be a small group space if we needed it. They're built like a reading intervention room. They're about that.
But if we make them permanent into those small groups and by adding in walls, then we can't make them instructional spaces. Then if we need to.
Well, that's already a 4-track school. and we wouldn't be able to accommodate schedules to add more
Talk
sections.
about West Side though,
Oh, you're,
because right now you got room for 180 for 200 kids at West Side. And if you change the walls, then you won't have room for 180 kids. Then we just make them smaller. And then we don't have room for 180 kids because now you've made them into all these extra rooms, right? Is that really the smart thing to do?
it's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Or do you make them
The same
temporary?
logic is you
Yeah.
could knock down walls in Southside, increase the the capacity there. So it's just sort of what's.
Yeah.
How much standardization do you want and how much sort of flexible capacity do you want? Because you have more flexible capacity when the rooms stay large, but then they're not being used for their intended purposes.
What is best for the learners?
Right. And what impact does that have on the culture and,
But I mean, I'm really asking that. Is it the having that space so that we aren't dragging kids across the building? Is that really impacting overall learner health in the entire building? Like to the point that we have a stable educational environment?
I think we had that conversation. We talked about adding on to some of our big schools and doing mega schools. I think you know where I stood on that. That that's not the best environment for anyone. And when we're already looking at retention and management of learners that are having trouble focusing on the academic components, those aren't best decisions for kids. But we also have to look at it from a fiscal responsibility. So I know it's hard.
Right.
Because we have room for 466 kids on the north side right now. 466, that's an entire elementary building. And I know they don't fit into those next little pods, but we have to be careful that we don't just take up all this space and spread out the smaller groups and keep diminishing our capacity. We have a bunch of rooms that may or may not get used during the day. They might, but they may not. They might remain empty too. So maybe the happy medium. And this still doesn't answer the question that when we're looking at purpose for West Fargo High, not having a multi-purpose space at all. At least these buildings
Way
have
behind the
space.
curve.
Just to clarify, okay, so what you were saying is that, like, let's theorize that if there are north side schools that have, room in their capacity, like technically we could take a classroom and have that be like the intervention room where kids who are having behaviors would go rather than having to go all the way down
Well,
to the office. That's what you're saying, but we don't necessarily have to like do construction to make it permanently only one thing.
Right.
We could use a bigger room for that and
Have the
retain the
flexibility.
options or flexibility to change it back to a classroom later.
Which we have done. So Westside has a good example of that. Legacy, who is a newer Southside school, has done some temporary. Osgood has done some staff.
That was my question is, I mean, other than
From Jeff.
Deer Creek and Meadowlark, which schools do have this? So I mean, even when we think of our new schools, Independence doesn't, right? Freedom doesn't.
Yeah, it started with Will.
Freedom
I
has
mean-
started something, but it started with.
We're talking about like per school. It's not like, oh, all the schools we built recently have this, like what is.
Correct.
Not the norm. No, it's not the norm.
So I mean, this would be like almost every school we have, elementary wise.
Well, Lisa, the question I think about a lot is, when you talk about equity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what is equitable? What is needed for equitable learning experiences, right? How do we define that? So.
I think to be completely transparent too, I mean, education changes,
Yeah.
right? People say it doesn't, it's like an iceberg, but it does. And we have some rooms right now on the south side, hit or miss, but where we've really talked about the push-in model. And so you could probably walk by some reading intervention classrooms during the day and it looks more like a teacher planning space because they are planning there and they are in the classroom with their learners versus going and getting learners and bringing them back to that instructional space. That's something I couldn't have said to you 3 years ago that was happening prevalently, but that is a shift that's happening. So that space is being used differently than was intended. So there are no guarantees and I don't want that for our kids. We really want to meet them where they're at and that means change.
Yeah, I want to make sure, as I know everyone does, but just we're utilizing spaces to their maximum.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
Those spaces.
Yeah.
And maybe we have a room that it's not being used the way it should be, but it's being used, right?
Well, I think we need to get some more answers for you specifically on which buildings we're talking about. What the buildings are, or needs are. When I'm thinking about a room, and when I was at West Side, we had a large room. And then to make those spaces, they were using bookshelves and dividers and things like that. And that was a safety issue, but I don't know if that's the issue across the board.
Right.
So I think there's multiple issues, and in fairness, I think we should take this back and have
I think we
Give you
need
more
more
answers.
answers. Yeah, I think we need to know what it
Yeah,
is.
exactly.
And it still didn't answer the space that I kind of felt like we should have is at West Fargo High, and that's not a part of this conversation. So
The,
multi-purpose room.
the multipurpose room was mentioned in the task force. It was kind of grouped together in group number 8 at the public forums. And we've maybe heard it in pockets. It turned up on the staff survey.
I think we need more information on what that looks like, because I think all of us kind of felt that the one thing West Fargo High is missing is that.
And it was talked about with the black box as well, which also was
Yeah.
mentioned, especially by the
The
learner.
learners were really big on
So
that.
do you want us to
Black
go back
box
with
is
more?
used very little, though. We had lots of conversation around the black box in the community and the costs of what that's used is very, very unutilized.
But could a community room like we're talking about be used as a black box? I mean, is there, except for the color, the, the theater?
Well, the black box, yeah, and it
It's
would have the
enclosed.
mirrors and I've seen.
It's like a
it in
small
Purdue,
theater.
Little theater. and things like
Got
that,
it.
but I would need more information unless somebody else can speak to it.
Watching film for football to doing, dance practices to doing, theater.
It's not
So-
cheap there.
But I mean, in essence, a multi-purpose room could fit that potentially.
How much is the cost?
Or,
What is the black box cost?
that was deemed last time to not, be a district standard, so we didn't even move it to costume.
Got it.
Multi-purpose rooms
It's
were.
definitely,
So-
it's a extra.
A few million.
So the cost for the Horace High multipurpose room was baked into the overall $32.4 million amount. And then to do an expansion on the west side of West Fargo High School was estimated at $1.8 million at that time. But I think we can scope whatever. I think just whether we look at just repurposing, classrooms for small group spaces, or whether we look at trying to have equitable small group spaces and breakout spaces, or both of those things, plus multi-purpose rooms for both, Horace and West Fargo High. I think this was the one that gave me the most anxiety just in terms of how do we meet your guys' expectations in terms of
Yeah.
doing more follow-up research, just to make sure that what we're bringing back is sort of aligned with the scope of information that you guys are interested in studying further.
Yeah, I'd like to just see more information on, why do we need them? What purpose are they going to solve?
Sure.
And
Where do we need them?
where do we need them?
And our conversation's mostly been on,
And how much?
we've been talking about all three, so both small group reconfiguration spaces, sort of the breakout spaces, as well as the multipurpose rooms for both high schools. Continue studying all three.
Or provide you with more, yes.
Yeah, more.
If I tried to explain the small group spaces based on what each one of you said, I would say no.
Yep.
Because I didn't understand, each one of us were saying something different, and my answer would be absolutely do not include that, because if I can't reiterate exactly what it's for, what I think it is, what you think it is, and what, none of us are on the same page, then we're gonna have a problem.
Right.
So if we're gonna do that, we just need to be very clear, is it special ed? Let's make sure then we say that, if it's more or whatever, but.
I think it's more, and we need to get you more information. And to your point, actually, Jeff is saying, yes, please don't tell me to put up walls and then take them down.
Well, I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
I've really,
Yeah.
done that.
We've had that conversation, so.
All right, let's, for the essence of time, flexible seating. I'd be curious to see what anyone has to say about this, but I just want to put my 2 cents out there. I kind of felt like flexible seating, every time we said this, no one understood what it was. But I kind of feel like this might be one of those things that I would like to have added to, if we have money in the general fund, and if this really is important, that this should just be part of our budgeting process to do, not across the board, everybody has to have it, but if someone needs something to fill that need, but I'm totally open to what anyone else has to say about this project.
There's
nobody need that.
We need to whittle that 147 million down, because I have a pretty good background on the community, and I keep hearing too much. They turned on Jay Thomas last week. He was telling us, you don't come back, West Fargo School Board, with ask for 147 million, and you look ahead. He's very comfortable on 5-year planning. And I hear that a lot, out on the streets a lot too.
So he wants us to go further with less money.
Yeah, I was just.
With it only-
Those are contradictories.
So
Very critical of us.
Yeah.
We did fail a bond for 40 million in 10 and passed one for 90 million in 11.
And then
right,
So I feel better.
they want the right plan.
Yeah.
But I think, I think everyone said that there was so much in here anyway to narrow this. I thought was one that most people don't understand it anyway, and, you know, chair is chair, that if we could maybe look at this as one of those to,
if I were to stand up at this meeting right now and stand, would people be uncomfortable?
No, because you're.
People would wonder what's going on, or you're educated in flexible seating and you know that that's an accommodation. For someone at the end of the day where their meds have wore off and things, you know, you need to get moving a little bit, that is a big deal. For our learners, it's the same thing. Educators understand that. And when I was visiting with a couple of them, they are very interested. They want that if they don't already have it. And the ones that I've talked to that do have it are really appreciative of it. The learners, you know, they think it's awesome, but the reality is they're empowered to learn.
What were we figuring for a dollar amount for this? Because this can't be for every classroom must not have flexible seating, and this must not be to.
West Fargo High has none.
So we scoped, again, for 23, just as point of reference, not dictating what we have to do, but we wanted to be very careful not to force flexible seating on teachers.
Right.
So, and we are much more deployed, even on the north side of the interstate, we are much more deployed at the elementary level than at the secondary level. So I had Randy Cummings, our operations specialist, send out a survey to Liberty, Cheyenne, West Fargo High, and Cheney, and say, tell us how many classrooms would want a flexible seating deployment, sort of based on what we were putting into Heritage and Horace. And so this wouldn't provide a universal standard. And that was for two reasons. One, to keep the cost down, and two, we did not want any teachers who were opposed to flexible seating trying to rally support against the bond referendum, because it meant it was going to be forced down their throats. But for everybody who opted in at those 4 comprehensive schools, that's where you got to 1.5 million. Now, to Patty's point, this is something between some ending fund balance that we'll likely have at the end of this year. This is something we could probably accomplish in the general fund as a priority one-time cost over 1, 2, or 3 years. So that's the small one where it's like that is within our annual. If the board's like, hey, let's make this a priority, that we can find the resources to do. I think there's not really a concern in that regard, but just for your point of reference, and I can't remember how many it was a classroom. I want to say, I'll go back and look with Randy, but that was at the time. Any teacher who wanted to raise their hand at any of those 4 schools that did, it came up to about 1.5.
And I remember from the very first time when it got introduced, it was one of like the asking, I think, you know, elementary and secondary leaders, like, what are your top desires? And flexible seating was one of the top 3, along with restrooms from, that's where the idea came from. On the other hand, at forums, I had many educators who were like, that's totally not necessary. So
we have several instances a year where teachers will trade furniture between, and we try to keep it within a building so that we're not hauling it, but, you know.
Based on the learner's needs.
That they try something and they maybe don't feel comfortable, or the classroom doesn't respond. And so I do think it's a who wants to opt into that. And then to always have that flexibility for shifting around furniture, I think is important. But I do think what you explained makes some sense amongst our staff. It wasn't 100% agreement, even with our staff, that's something that they all necessarily want. But some in those classrooms, standing and having that flexibility is a need. So to be able to provide that based on the learner's need, it doesn't have to be an all
Great.
When at the elementary, we were able to use leftover funding from 2018.
Right.
Randy really helped that, and we gave educators kind of a little bit different because it was elementaries, and said, what would you like? And then we didn't let them just the world is your oyster. We with quality pricing. We said, here are some different choices for chairs. Here are some different desks. Here are some different balls, and let them. And so a lot of them did like half their classroom or a quarter of their classroom.
And they switched with each other.
Yep.
But what a concern I have is when we don't have an opportunity for that, they bring in big old furniture that may or may not be, you know, safe or, they painted it in some crazy colors and things because teachers, we love to do that.
Sadly, $1 million.
We really do love to do that.
Sadly, $1 million, 147, 146, that's not really gonna tip the scale for Jay Thomas to say, well, we did a really good job. We reduced the amount of money that we're asking for.
Starting point.
For the little one.
It is a start. Yeah.
It would just be a budget to make sure we wanted funding, not to necessarily, but doesn't really do that, but.
I respect teachers that may want it, may not want it. I want to make sure we have an actual process for teachers to have access to it. As I think back to my years on PTO and the thousands of dollars that we funded for teacher requests for flexible seating, right? And then, we have new schools where it's just there.
Right.
And their PTOs aren't funding it. So that's not right, right?
Yeah.
So just that opportunity for it there, and we have the groups that are rallying together for the schools for, it shouldn't be for flexible seating. So, in my opinion.
And maybe it shouldn't be flexible seating. It should be upgrades to classroom,
Other,
equipment or something on that order instead of just flexible
well, because
seating.
if we're putting them in our new schools, we're saying it's important, right? So.
But in the new schools, does every classroom have it even if the teachers don't want it?
Yeah.
So they don't have a choice.
But I do see some of them trading out again.
Yes,
Like
we do
Jeff
have,
said.
we do have some movement with one very rare exception, I think of Carol
course.
finding some desks somewhere else for 2 classrooms. First new edition, we have a standard of these are the things we procure as part of our FF&E that you guys approve, and it has 100 different lines on it. So at least as a starting point, and that sort of standard has evolved over time. So we have an elementary, we have a middle and a high school one, which was the most feedback that we've gotten for the high school one from Horace went into that one. So we're constantly updating it based on, well, these chairs don't work. And that's what I think was one of the really nice things about elementary was people did do a little bit of R&D, and that has continued to further improve. But we have a half classroom deployment. So Randy knows what to buy. We want to do a half classroom and a full. And so I guess to add even a little more data, that's actually what the principals were able to ask. I'm not ready to go all the way. I'll keep some desks and tables, give me a half deployment or a full.
Can't see that.
full classroom.
And we've toured with principals.
Do we have any flexible seating
Right.
that's in storage?
And it's there.
It's there.
We do have, it's pieces of it. So we'll have some tables, we'll have some chairs, but it's not the full assortment.
Right.
Usually it's a mixture that ends up in a classroom, so.
If Amber put in a work order and said Cheney wants 15 classrooms of flexible seating, we don't have that on hand.
So it would be nice to have a budget of money though that was designed specifically for that. If we don't have in the general fund, if it was included in this, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea.
Yeah, I think we're an appropriate size where over a year or 2 or 3, depending on where we end this fiscal year even, where we can chip away on that process and make sure that there is access for teachers who want it
Without it being in the bond.
without it being in the bond. Yep.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the improvements in the restroom, because I'm sure this will be a different conversation. I'm thinking, I was wondering what exactly the scope of this looks like. I think that was the first thing I said. So which restrooms are we looking to do this to? And the dollar amount seemed a little low from what we originally had. So what are we looking at for this one?
Well, again, most of the conversation, at least in 2.0, has been very high level iterative. So I think generally we're talking about the value of single stall restrooms. But that's probably, I don't know that we got much more specific than that. I don't know, Mr. Williams, I think that was part of your you have anything you want to add there? I'll put some of the cost.
One of the things that came out from the forums is like the public. Overwhelming support for the of how you do it.
Having boys and girls, my girls would never use it.
Right.
My son's bathroom, they were like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Only in an absolute, and that's at home.
Yeah.
Dr. Cronin got creative with that with the high school kids and let them figure out what the signs should say. Like, this is for standing, this is for sitting. So she's like, you guys figure it out. It's your bathroom. What do you want the sign to say?
I love that.
Many people in the community that don't understand those single stalls,
Right.
they think many think it's a transgender issue.
No,
And you go, wait a minute, no, it's not. And you have to explain to them how it works at the elementary, how efficient it is with a pair standing there and boys and girls. But I did get some feedback, at one of our meetings, got blasted at Heritage because the middle school boys are under a lot of control and it's really messy and on purpose, they do things in there.
And that's part of the split them up by gender because sometimes boys have a hard time aiming. At least that's what we heard from the community. And so some of our female learners are a little apprehensive to
Yeah.
in the same restroom.
We had several occasions
Yeah.
where we had stakeholders verbally say, you know, I didn't understand, or I wasn't for this, and now I do understand, and now I am for this. So it took a full amount of explaining what was really the process.
Yeah. I think there was a basketball game at Forest High School. And the only facilities available were the stall ones, not the public ones, and elderly ladies went in there in their eighties and came out and were just furious because of the boys. And the mess in there, and that was probably at 4:30 or 5, the custodians probably didn't have a chance.
I do have a question on, I know part of one of the values of these bathrooms is decreasing behaviors. So my question, and I've just heard this overwhelmingly across the schools, is of course, the number of behaviors, but why do we have this overabundance of behaviors in the bathroom in the first place? And how do we decrease that in the first place? Because I don't want, these bathrooms shouldn't be the fix for that, right?
but if you can have a female teacher that has line of sight of the male
Correct.
learners,
Of course.
Yeah.
that's the behavior
Yeah.
fix right there. It's the whole ICU concept.
Yeah, they're in there by themselves. With no adult.
It's eliminating a congregation.
That's correct.
If you're our age, you remember the song Smoking in the Back?
Yeah.
So it goes way back to the early days of the 1920s probably.
Sending them one at a time versus a break, you know.
Been a lot better. if I didn't have those bathrooms.
Yeah, absolutely.
High school. Some of our secondary schools are
Right.
taking a lot in some of the bathroom suites during the day. Our secondaries use the e-hall pass and they limit the number of people that can be out on a restroom e-hall pass at
Yes.
a time. So they are doing some of those things to also address some of those behavior pieces. So it wouldn't just be the.
They've also
I think it's-
staff whole sections.
I was gonna say West Fargo High School is, I mean, those learners are walking a long way
Yeah.
to use the rest. I would be in trouble. Like,
Well, I think what else has changed is even when I was in high school, their smartphones weren't really a thing yet. And
No,
that's
sure.
also a very terrifying and very regular thing that high school kids have to think about now.
I think we talked about that, the bathroom audit, though, at the time, why didn't we just put in
Yeah.
the barriers top to bottom without having to do the whole thing over? So there wasn't able to go over the top and underneath, and we just didn't get that done, and now we're looking. So what exactly does it look like at West Fargo High? Because you're talking about high school, because now when you walk into their cafeteria, you walk in, there's no doors, it's girls, you walk in, no doors, and it's boys to this side. So we're gonna tear that out to make a
line?
line on site so they share, because otherwise you're not gonna fix that problem anyway. And are we doing that in each of our buildings to tear out things that because that one's already separated. So that would be a prime example of you want to be able to see into them, but you can't see because they're, tell me what that, I mean, where are we looking to do this? Maybe is my question. What exactly?
I
What's
think
this?
we'd have to go back to the audit that was conducted back in 2018 to see what was recommended. But I also think one piece that we may be forgetting is the single stall restrooms also protect our educators. So you think about having our educators, you know, you talk about how can we decrease the congregating and the behavior, to ask an educator to go into a restroom facility to monitor kids, that can be tricky. You know, you can be accused of certain things. And so this would allow for supervision to happen outside of, you know, entering into the restroom. And so where would we be doing this? We'd have to look at that audit. So.
But would we tear, because the high school would be a perfect example of that, because you can't see into that. I mean, you have to walk around the corner to see
It would
what
be
you do
a
there.
pod in the building. It doesn't necessarily be in only in that spot.
I want to say it
Could be
was,
the different
I'll go back, I'm sort of digging through my emails from 22, but for the scope of what was included in the 2023 vote, I want to say it was one for elementary school, and we already have them in some elementary schools, so it wasn't everyone gets one, but sort of like with playgrounds, to ensure that at the end, every elementary had one.
Set of that.
One set of them, so think like West Side. So when you walk in, there was the one boys, one girls, there's now sort of one pod, so that.
Typically by the gyms.
Right.
That's typically where we've been putting them.
So that's sort of the West Side renovation is a pretty clean, because the one at Eastwood they weren't bathrooms, they were storage area.
Yep.
So sort of that model at the elementary schools that didn't have it. And then I think the secondary, it was two. But the feedback we got from secondary was, given that those buildings are generally more than twice the size of the elementary schools, there was some concern that two wouldn't be sufficient, but I'm pretty sure it was one per elementary and two per secondary, which means they would essentially be choosing which pods would be replaced. Since we have far more bathroom sets than that at our large secondary schools.
And you remember what the cost was that we had
I
said?
do know the total cost. So included in the single stall restrooms was 3.8 million. So that I know for sure. I'm remembering the one per elementary and two per secondary, but feel free to keep conversing, and I will find it, but I'm pretty sure that's what the basis of the cost was from YHR.
Did you say 1 million for elementary?
One sort of bank of restrooms per elementary.
What elementaries don't have them or do?
Easier to say which ones do.
Okay.
Deer Creek,
Harwood.
Eastwood, West Side, Horace Elementary has some
Oh, and then
now
new addition.
in the new edition.
No.
Legacy does not.
I don't think Legacy does. So I think two,
Legacy, Aurora, Brooks doesn't.
so I think on the south side, I think it's just Deer and Horace.
We're gonna take brand new buildings with brand new bathrooms and we're gonna tear them up to build. And I really, I mean, I get it, but I really have a hard time knowing the number of dollars that's gonna take, and it's not easy. That we're gonna take new and destroy it to make something we think is new and better. I don't always like to do that, but. They're new.
I know, but how much are we really talking? Is it just a wall?
Well, in the new building, we wouldn't touch, because they're already in Heritage Horace Elementary,
Like
Deer
Freedom.
Creek.
She's saying like Brooks Harbor.
Brooks Harbor,
Sure.
Freedom,
Yeah.
Legacy, Willow.
It adds up to $4 million. It's.
I mean, it all adds up to, I mean, it seems like whenever you renovate a bathroom, it's never cheap. I mean, even in your house, if you think it's gonna be, I mean, it's like astronomical what they charge you. So whatever we think it is, I really think it's gonna be twice, because for some reason they end up being way more than they should be per bathroom. But when they're new, it's really hard for me to say and justify. They're brand new or relatively new, 5 years, 10 years is new, that we tear it all up because we think this might be better. But
And that's what I'm asking, like, would we need to tear it all up, or can the stools stay where they are and the walls are constructed around them? I mean, is it,
The dimensions don't work out, so to
Okay.
build a full wall, you're losing inches.
yeah, that's what I was asking. Yep, that's what I wanted to know.
Isn't Evercall was also one of like the top wishes from educators, like to
Mhm.
compare it. I wonder if there was some way for us to understand, like, why did they want it? What is the impact? Is it you know, like,
They have.
like you were saying, like risk of staff not wanting to fulfill certain roles because of like what they're being asked to do.
I
You
can
know,
help answer
more
that.
staff hours are needed for behavior, things like that. Like, I mean, if we could calculate either qualitative or quantitative data that could tell us like what is the benefit to it, like that might be better to compare the actual monetary cost.
I think the qualitative.
Yeah, the qualitative or, quantitative, I can tell you, with teachers and educators that came through our forum specifically referenced the ability to help decrease behaviors.
Yeah.
Which then my
Behaviors are
question is,
bullying.
Yep.
well, right, and then the question
Smoking,
comes, when you have kids that are overwhelmingly, we heard this overwhelmingly, my own kids are like this, and it's just, again, not my own family, but overwhelmingly heard they don't use the bathroom because they're scared of what they're gonna walk into. That's a problem.
No, but yeah, it is.
Yeah,
So-
and I think, like, just going through this whole process, I try to look at it through the lens of what is our strategic plans call us to do. And so when you look at the wellness goal, to paraphrase, we want to make sure that our learners can come to school and feel safe, so that they can engage in the learning process. And I would say that having space, like a restroom, multi-stall restroom, has caused a lot of anxiety for a lot of learners. So whatever we can do to mitigate that, to help them to in a good space to learn,
What concerned me is that that's very true, but if you're only gonna do a small one or two of them in the building the size of our high schools, that's only a really small portion of people who use those, all the rest of them are still exposed.
But if you're scared of what you're gonna walk into, you might take a longer trip to find it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess we would need to be sure that like whoever wants to can get to that one, I mean.
So what can we get you? I do believe that our elementary principals have talked about this a lot, about the reduced incidences and prevention of incidents.
And theirs is different. I mean, it's different at the elementary than it is the high school.
right.
They like to take, I think, valuing instructional time as well as safety, but when we put them by the gymnasium, they can take a whole class bathroom break and all the kids can get in and out and they're saving that time and getting them to specials. Whereas if it's just a hit and miss during the reading block, one or two are going, they use those other sets. But it is a time thing. It's also they narrow down, look on the camera, who made the best in that bathroom. Well, you know what? You came out last. I guess it was you. They know those things and it is
Right.
saving on all ends of it. They're not relying on it, on thinking about it as the cure for behavior, but it is all of those things. It's different at elementary, but they do value that from an instructional end as well as a wellness and safety.
So we should think about what we could. I think our board needs more information because there is obviously a cost. So what outweighs the good?
And I suppose we could look back at, like our Swiss data,
Yeah.
maybe at our elementaries of buildings when they
That's
didn't
what I
have it and then when they did, just to see if
Yeah.
because they track those too. Was it in the hallway? Was it in the bathroom? And see if we're seeing some things that stand out there as far as
That's a
data.
great idea.
That's a great idea. And you again can attest to what I specifically heard in the forum.
Yeah.
I'm quite confident would support that, but to see those numbers behind it would be very.
I'm a little concerned when you're talking about, if we do some of the bathrooms at the high school, that any of the trouble that would have happened in those bathrooms, since they're gonna be open and easy to see, they're just gonna move to all the other ones. So if we have this, we're gonna do some, but not all. I don't know that we necessarily, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't really fix all our problems.
Nope, I agree.
But on the other hand, if someone wants to avoid that, like then they would have a choice to avoid it. So like someone who's smoking in the bathroom could go to another bathroom to smoke, but if someone's being afraid of like being bullied, they could have a specific place to go that they know someone else couldn't get into.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, any more discussion with the bathrooms or something? You got
I think the data with the quality.
I think the data would be,
The data and maybe just a high level on where this
yeah,
secondary versus elementary, obviously, a little bit different needs, but just
Yeah.
cost, I think.
because this could get to be a lot more money than we think too, so.
Yeah, and I guess if, based on what I'm hearing, both would be certainly beneficial, but if you had to rank elementary versus secondary, I'd maybe rank elementary, I guess, first. just,
Interesting.
you know,
No, I think-
And see, I would do the opposite.
If they want to use in the bathrooms because of all the very same thing you're talking about.
yeah,
They're the oldest and the most dingy and probably the least updated when you look at West Fargo High. And
true. Yeah, I didn't,
I would go take a walk, John,
Yeah.
at West Fargo High and see how far those learners are having to walk to go to
oh,
the.
yeah, I mean, I've walked around there.
But with the ones that are closed, I mean, they're across the building.
I don't know if it's that though, Tricia, because we're not looking to add bathrooms, so what would really help?
That's the thing.
If you can have a bathroom open that's currently closed.
Right, yeah, it's not been functioning right now if it's closed, you can't get into it.
Gotcha.
They have to lock it, that then opens up.
Yeah. But then we'd have to fix it, but yes. Interesting conversation.
No, they're not closed because they're out of order, that's because they're not safe.
Yeah.
They're just because kids are smoking in them,
Well,
Or doing other
also, I
things.
think if we did get it like a
can't be supervised.
listing of how many total bathrooms is this at elementary versus secondary, and we could separate out the cost. If we could, not that we would necessarily decide this as our priority, but if we did want to, we would know like what is the cost per bathroom if for some reason we needed to do this on an incremental basis over the course of years.
And is that something we could build into the process of the general budget?
It's almost a bathroom audit point 2.0.
2.0.
Yeah, right.
That's part of the construction of them.
So we talk about education.
Things have changed.
Yeah.
Compete for
And we really haven't done a lot of things with the bathroom audit. We've done some, but.
pretty tough.
All right, should we move on since man, we are way more discussion on some of these nice facts. So we didn't talk about restrooms, flexible seating. We talked about the land purchase.
Nope.
Possibility of land purchase. What do we have left? Is that the last one? Am I missing here?
Land specialized invest.
Oh, so we gotta wait for the best till last time. Let's talk about- We gotta wait for that because that's so much fun. So let's talk about land purchase and then we'll talk about the special education spaces. I kind of thought we did that a little bit with the small group space. It kind of got tied in with that, but I think we're different.
I landed my breakout group, and everyone was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I think it kind of cuts back to are we talking about just the immediate 5 year of needs in front of us? Then obviously you don't need to include it. If we're trying to make the case that we're looking 10-ish, longer time horizon, then this is something that's unquestionably in our financial interests to do so while we can buy it while it's still in the floodplain versus not. Again, we can't, everything under 10 million, we can't just say, well, we'll do it on our own. These are also other things that we, want to save up for if we determine that some things are worth saving versus putting in a bond. But I would say there wasn't a lot of discussion because people saw the map that Travis put on the board and it was kind of like, yeah, we're going to need more land. Eventually, so I think it was very much a consensus item, just sort of comes back to the scope of how the horizon of the ask.
What are we thinking dollar wise for that, Levi?
2023, it was 5 million, which was just a sort of best guess estimate of 50,000 an acre at 100 acres would be potentially get you enough to break off and do some land swaps for elementary schools. Horace, I'd modeled it off of Horace and Heritage together, about 90 acres, Jeff, give or take. And then an elementary is 10 acres. So that would give you about what you would need for school, middle school and elementary school.
That sounds actually kind of reasonable, but overall, was the consensus pretty good? I mean, I didn't hear any when I was looking through I didn't see any super negative. Most of it were.
I did hear or see somewhere the idea, let's not go that far down the road. But then I think if I was going, I would say I heard much more, you need to look further down the road.
There was,
This was north of the year, north.
Yeah, north of 12. I mean, I had some highly preliminary conversations with some landowners just to get a sense of what the cost, might be. So if you're thinking between 9th Street and County Road 17, north of the industrial park, sort of puts you between County Road 20 and 19th Avenue.
Yeah, I was at graduation party yesterday morning at 19th Avenue.
Sure.
Chris Weary bought building a ranch out there.
Sure.
And he goes, this is gonna fill in because it's beautiful. And so that's, once the diversion gets done.
Yeah, it'll go quick, and just like Meadowlark, purchased on a square foot basis. You won't be buying it on an acre basis.
Right.
For much longer.
And I really liked, there was one of the learners on the advisory board, and Horace said, well, this makes sense. It's a great investment opportunity for the district. And even if it can't get used.
Right now, it's
if
been
it
gain
could be-
value. Yeah.
Right, and it could be sold later for other areas or other things that the district needs. So even if it were to never be used for school, it's a great investment opportunity, which isn't something that I don't think I've ever heard a school district think that way, but.
We've done that with all our, every
Right.
projects we had with.
But to hear it out of a learner's mouth,
Yeah.
that they're thinking that way too.
Yeah, the only negative feedback I got was someone said if $5 million is the difference between it passing or failing, take it out. But otherwise, it's an investment.
We said the same thing, we started talking about hockey.
Also valued at $5 million, I think.
So let's talk about special education before we talk about hockey. That was kind of the small group spaces, I think. Is there something?
Yeah, that's another iteration. We've made adjustments over time. I think Rachel Chunnis had presented. We've seen some interesting data at Westside with some reconfiguring some of their special education spaces. We have some bathrooming access issues in our special education suites. And so most of it was sort of off of what we've learned at Westside, as well as the spaces that have had some significant distances to bathrooms. Like at South, you have to walk through the gymnasium in order, to take a student with special needs to the restroom for bathrooming. And then we have discovered that buying study cubicles can pose a safety issue for climbing or for hipping. And so our newer schools were physically building either study carrels or half walls. So I think, just so you know what I think Rachel presented on, it was sort of the study carrel expansion to get rid of some of our varying degrees of homemade walls. Thank you, Jeff and company. Trying to locate bathrooms near if there's not one nearby, and then to try to expand this sort of de-escalation / behavior MTSS. It's not just for special ed. I think Chris does a nice job of talking about that, but it's an intentional space for multi-tiers of behavior support.
And that's what I was explaining too, and I think that's why those two categories of special ed spaces and small special pop spaces, they're kind of blurred, but they're in the same.
But I know,
It is a need in our buildings for those smaller spaces.
I mean, the temporary spaces they found, and that was where she emphasized
The
that
safety,
the safety on that. It's like,
and I witnessed that firsthand.
yeah.
And it's not just learners that are serviced by an IEP.
Yeah.
They're
Right.
teaching
Oh, yeah.
this for behavior health and wellness.
I think it's hard for these though, if we can't get more specific though, sort
Yeah.
of generalize that, what exactly does that mean? Are we talking $10 million for, 4 different renovations? I mean, what is this? Otherwise, we're just giving, or are we just budgeting because we know there's needs? And we're going to be very specific to say, we know these needs for sure, and we're going to have put this budget in place because there's more to come. And how does that look like? So I
I
think
just have that down here, so I think that goes back to what we had said we need to get for you. So
Yeah, I think
I
the
don't think
biggest,
it was very many dollars that we had put into this one either. No,
1.7 last time.
I shouldn't say that. It's a lot of money for the whole.
As a percentage of the.
Total.
Everything.
It's all a lot of money. Going back to those bathrooms, I'm sure if it's 50,000, it's more like 200,000 for the big bathroom.
but they just, and just to, because I listened to Rachel and I did the security, she did the bathroom or what was called the sensory rooms.
Yeah.
And no one.
Ones I was talking about at Deer Creek.
Yeah.
Sensory rooms.
What that meant, and it sounds, something fancy.
A nice to have.
A nice to have, and so that's where people went. As soon as Rachel explained what they would do and the safety and the structural, program that they could provide with those types of rooms, no one had any problem with it.
Mhm.
But it was, the biggest thing is you need to help everybody understand what they are. They aren't sensory rooms. They're,
Right.
and
De-escalation.
Yes, yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
de-escalation.
Now we need details.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Either a fun room or they kind of thought it was a padded room.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Well,
And I'm not, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I do know that there was a lot of miscellaneous comments not tied to any project that said things like, you need to make sure kids with behaviors can get out of classrooms. So people did think that we needed a plan for that.
Mhm.
They just didn't tie it.
Well, yeah, we just
We
didn't
put a
label
plan
it
for
right,
that.
yeah.
Right.
They didn't get that those two things were related.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll continue to probably scope of the relative cost and deployment on those kind of same standards as well.
Well, and I don't know, I mean, to your point, it's, you start talking about small rooms for education, how can you tie them together? I mean, or
Right.
not, is it two separate or is it something that
Together, those
yeah.
seem like me, they're kind of together.
they could be, small instructional rooms and if they could be used, but if, for example, say special ed needs those rooms more often and they're not going to be open for,
Or reading, or.
I'm just.
And they look different. So the same,
Yeah.
and I think we just have to be really clear about how we're using them because at West Side, they call it the Wildcat Zone. And
Sure,
within that
yes.
room, there is a de-escalation room, which is the same thing as the small group sensory room at Deer Creek.
Yep.
Exact same thing, different setting,
And it's something different at Osgood.
And,
something different in.
Yeah.
the red zone.
I think the simpler they make it, the better though,
Yeah,
for understanding and for explaining.
yes. I think it's the importance of having space for that.
Right. And it could be for reward too. It's not always for punishment.
Yes. And so the funds
Yeah.
part, you get there after 3 other rooms.
Yeah.
You work your way there.
Work your way there.
Yeah, kids speak to it pretty well.
Stand those rooms anyway, because it's not something we're used to having in a
Exactly.
school.
Yep.
I mean, most people would say, well, why do you need all of that? So I think
Yep.
that's what's changed in education. They hear it, but they don't understand it.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else from that one? Otherwise, moving on to my favorite topic. Last but not least, that's Arena.
Expansion project.
I think first that we should probably, that I've said before, that we need to reiterate, that if we truly need a third sheet of ice, that if we're gonna add or not add this to a project, that we shouldn't say that it's either or. It's either we're gonna add on to the Vets Arena for $15 million or not the Vets Arena, the hockey
Sports
arena,
arena.
sports arena, or we're gonna partner with the hockey and park district for $5 million and do a Vets Arena addition, and we'd save $10 million. I think that people forgot that it's not, we don't need ice. We need the ice.
Right.
It's just a matter, we're gonna spend 15 million or we're gonna spend 5 million, but
I think you teed that up well, Patty. That was presented to the original task force and people were like, yeah, we already have the facility. The easy thing would be just add a third sheet at the place that was sort of anticipated to have a third sheet. It was designed with the infrastructure necessary to add one on site, but the cost estimates came back from JLG, and I think even at that time it was 17 million. Where, this sort of sprang up organically between youth hockey and the park district. It doesn't limit, taxpayers to 5 million, because obviously West Fargo Parks would be getting it from somewhere. But the idea of taking the cost down through a public-private partnership and providing a renovation and an expansion of an existing facility. And that's what led the original task force to say, it was purely economics, go the way of I mean, if the problem we're trying to solve is kids not practicing at 11 PM at night, if that's the goal, do that by the most efficient means possible. And that turned out to be through the partnership with the exploration of expanding Vets Arena versus just doing it on our own. There's a lot less collaboration and communication and planning and work, to be done when it's just us adding on to something we already own versus trying to make sure that the needs and wants of two other entities are taken into account. But it was, this one was definitely the most divisive, looking at the data, that Heather had sent out. But the reason why it was as a Vets expansion was pure and simple from a cost standpoint.
As well as bringing Packers back.
Right. Yep.
So
Can I ask, like, when we reference like that idea of like, so kids aren't practicing at like 6:30 or 11 PM, like, is it our high school teams who are practicing then, or is it other teams that rent from?
It's our youth kids. It'd be like our West Fargo elementary kids that are practicing.
Right,
That-
but not,
Not our high school teams.
not through us.
No, not,
Through the
Not
district.
through the
They're
district, no.
through their private
We don't have.
separate
optional
groups, correct.
organization.
Yes, and it's generally fallen on.
Take up the time that they could practice.
Right, just, I mean, we have 3 teams that we,
Correct.
from on high school level, that we need to provide ice for, and hopefully more.
Yes,
But I mean, when we are referencing like the very, which I know is very accurate,
Yep.
wide range of times, that is for all of the hockey needs, not just the public school.
the three teams. That I think is a very apt summary.
Logan, could you give us some numbers? Because we keep hearing there's all these kids, but then I keep hearing we have all these kids, but yet they don't make it to high school hockey. They drop out before they get from the youth program to high school. What are our numbers? When do you foresee we will need, Forest will have enough to have its own team?
I think anywhere, because next year's obviously out of the question for that. So I'd say anywhere from the next 2 to 4 years, we are going to have our boys team at Forest High School.
How about girls?
Girls, 4 to 5, I'd say is when we'll start looking at it. Our youth numbers are a lot better in girls at the younger levels than we thought. So
Is Cheyenne and West Fargo still together?
for
Girls?
Yes.
it's all.
United.
Yep. All three.
So realistically, then we may not have 2 girls teams even 5 years from now, if the numbers continue as they are now.
But realistically,
It's possibly, so many,
there's been a lot of attrition in girls hockey as you referenced, as they get older.
I know a lot of them are leaving here and going to play with the traveling team, for various reasons, which I don't quite understand, but I know we're losing a lot of girls to that.
Yeah, we lose boys too.
There's about 1,000 kids, I understand, in youth hockey.
Yeah.
And what Jeremy told us, Jorgensen.
Yep, there'll be 1,000 kids in youth hockey in the next 2 years.
And then through attrition, where the numbers will drop.
Mhm.
Because he's a better skater and player than I am. Okay, I'm gonna go play basketball. Or it's just part of life.
Or they have to choose sports. I mean, you can't be in multi very often
It's
anymore.
capitalism at its finest in
Right.
athletics.
Yeah. Yeah,
Strong survive.
yeah, it's true.
I have another follow-up question. So going back to like the initial task force for the 2023 bond.
Yeah.
And I remember just talking about the ice, like the idea that like that our $5 million was for ice and nothing else. And so many people were like, you need to say about all the other things that you're going to do. And I honestly don't know if the district was ever proposed to do anything other than give $5 million towards ice. And so I'm very confused about like, can we say it's anything else? Like, this is going to be part of the expansion if our $5 million was really just only ever supposed to be for ice.
So that's a good question. So I think there's a couple layers to that. One was we got some initial feedback, like build a mini Rusted on the south side where it's not meant to be hockey specific. And that got priced, I think, at $20 million. So that got taken off the table very quickly. So then it was sort of the 5 million was for this addition, but we made it very clear that we did not want facilities that were better or worse than the sports arena. Because that was one thing that was very important from the Packer hockey community was if we don't have a locker room that's comparable to the sports arena, then we would be excited to move back, but then we'd have sort of our own original equity issues.
Yeah.
So there was sort of there was the Vets expansion, Vets 3 expansion, which included some team room space, which got a little bit complicated from rental and usage. But really the expansion was meant to be sort of 3 parts. The ice itself, 2 locker rooms, which would be roughly scaled to this West Fargo Sports Arena locker rooms. And then some team rooms because West Fargo High School does not have sort of the team room space like Cheyenne and Forest does behind the concession stand. It's just bathrooms there. So to add some pop-up doors that could be used inclement weather at a girls soccer game or
All the outdoor sports.
Yeah.
outdoors, for fall and spring activities. That was sort of the scope. It got a little messy because the park district wanted to start haggling over rental fees, which I said, well, if we're paying for something we could just build on our own, then we could just go build a team room for the Packers, you know, on our own land. So things got a little, you know, hairy, back to sort of the added challenges of collaboration, but it's worth it if it saves taxpayers money. But that was really the scope of, there was some conditions that if we were gonna make this move, we wanted to be equitable. So it was locker room, ice, and team rooms was sort of what the 5 million was supposed to
And, and
accomplish.
team rooms are benefiting sports other than hockey?
The team rooms would actually benefit sports, not hockey, that are outdoor, football,
Track, soccer, anybody who plays on.
More like indoor practice space?
More like, they're humble, they sound better than they are, they sound a little more grandiose than they are. They're gonna be sort of tacked on to the side of the building. So if you're at Cheyenne, watching a football game, you know, you have the windows of concessions. And then on one side, there's literally a 1.5 stall garage door that opens up to a 20 by 20, 30 foot space.
So they can go there at halftime
So they have a space to go that's dried
or dry.
during halftime.
Or game starts.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not meant to be.
So it was actually meant to be external facing to then also for softball and men and women's soccer and football and track and field. In that regards, because we were talking about, well, the idea is parity. We could build these stick structures on our own, but if there's an opportunity for them to be collaboratively used, that was sort of the scope.
Go there instead of freezing the entire halftime sitting under the goalpost.
Right.
Makes you tougher, right, Eddie?
Divines, right?
Packers don't come inside.
Yeah, I doubt Jay Gibson would use them even if we built them, but maybe someday somebody would.
Have you seen the video?
But that was what was included, supposed to be included in the 5 million. There was some other
Okay.
discussions about
Glove dry.
other turf spaces and other things. But I think the cost of that scared people away pretty quickly.
Well, they hear the three little, they hear ice.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and they didn't hear the rest of it.
No, they didn't hear the
Maybe
rest.
that's the message, is that we have to look at the whole picture and our contribution. The whole picture is X. Our contribution would be smaller at X rather than just saying it's just other cheap ice.
That's a arena
Back to the-
extension.
The vets,
Yeah.
yeah, just a vets arena extension that will do all of that.
And we need to sit down, if we do decide with the hockey parents or association and say, you gotta get the voters.
Well, I think there is a separate, this is an activity. And it was interesting because I was thinking about the accessible playgrounds. Is that an activity or is that part of academics? And I think what your comments really do kind of, that those are all academic needs based for, growth, educating our learners. Whereas ICE is an activity and that's a lot of what I heard.
I know we've had some conversation and I can hear that they've brought up when we go forward to do a bond vote. Is there any sort of ideas rather than, because hockey is the one thing that we had the most negative feedback across the board, even people who were all happy about it, think we get to hockey and they say no. And part of that is maybe we didn't communicate well, but this might be one of those situations that we should do them two separate and think about as we go to make a package that one we definitely want in our core ones that we absolutely, and if that one passes, then to put the non-academic ones, anything that's in the athletic and put that separate. And in order for that to pass, we'd have to have great support from our hockey people. They better come out and make sure one passes before we do two. And then we kind of appease both, saying, we understand that 145 million is a lot, but we're gonna let the voters decide. Here's what we absolutely have to have. This is the non-educational. And maybe we entertain looking at what that might look like.
I think you just nailed it.
And then it's not really the number, it's really about, it's the education have to, if they feel like they can support the rest, because I think, Levi, what did you say, 110 to 160 million per 100,000? What are we talking dollar wise?
For the cost impacts?
Yeah, I mean, if you did, well, let's just say what we take hockey, I don't know, well, what would be reduced? So just say 120 to 160 million, what per 100,000, what does that cost, the average?
I know the $5 million was, I think, about $2.50 a year.
$2.50
Give or take against I think it was 70 to 69 per 100,000.
$10 to $20, 20 million is $10 or $15
$2.47. I have
How much?
$2.47.
Yeah. So when you think about that, you just don't really realize they think that's a lot of money for the whole, and it is a lot of money, but it might be something we can think about, and that way we take care of all those people who actually say they're gonna vote no because of hockey. They can vote no on hockey, but they still are voting on the other stuff. They said they'd be happy to support a sign. We get our academic, which we absolutely have to have, and hope that we get the rest of it in the second part of it, so.
I think that's genius.
I think the only clarification I would add, and thank you, Mr. Steiner, for sending some emails to DPI. I did speak with Adam. He doesn't believe that it's a legal requirement, but the stacked language was done in Minot where it was board sort of policy declaration. That question one is our no nonsense, we gotta get this, done here now. And that they would only consider moving forward with number 2 and number 3 if the subsequent ones passed. So
I think that we have.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, and I was wondering with that idea too, like when we keep referring like 5-year, 10-year plan, if we could do something like that with like, here are the 5-year plan things. And
Yep.
then here are the things that are more like
I
the
was
10-year
thinking
plan.
about that thing too. You could chunk them different ways.
the land, the elementary school, maybe the second preschool expansion. I mean, you could sort of do a 0 to 5, 5 to 10 activities type thing.
Could it be by triggers of, if this is needed by population or enrollment or something?
Right.
And that would, versus time period, we don't know.
People have asked for that, Rachel. I think it's exactly spot on. They've said, how do you know you need? And if we had that more detailed saying, here's where we know. And even Logan saying,
Yeah.
We built in accountability.
They want.
Because 5 years might not be 5 years, it might be 3 because of enrollment, or it might be 7, but then we're
Right.
looking at some things that are unpredictable.
but I think being honest about enrollment numbers with hockey, where our youth, I mean, they say, well, we don't need that, and I get, they're not our high school kids. They are our kids who are playing.
And,
hockey.
I'm sure, I mean, it does affect,
It does.
when an 8-year-old is practicing really, it does.
'Cause they're
But
in our
the parents
classroom.
also get to make that decision if they want to do that.
Great.
But they're in our classroom sleeping probably because we're up too late or early.
Yeah,
in the
I
morning.
think we value activities and families choose different activities for different reasons. Some families are choosing tennis and they're playing year round and they're paying a lot of money for it.
Yep.
Some are choosing pole vaulting and they're doing weight training all winter long, but a lot of families choose hockey.
I mean, if they want to be any good.
And so, I think when we put this package together, the board approved that. It was based on need, but not everyone views need the same way.
And our primary purpose is,
Is, and so we want to, for one, we want to do a better job identifying and communicating specific needs so that people aren't, well, where is it? What are we doing? Want to do that, and then you all have a big decision about how you want to chunk it, if you want to chunk it at all. And in the meantime, we need to get you quite a bit more information. You'd like us to study those small group spaces with specific schools and what they'd be used for specifically and the why behind those. You wanted more information about the restrooms as far as where would, not maybe details on exactly where they go, but what is the data to support them? More information on the hockey. Do we need more hockey numbers? Or
I just think in general, I mean, a good number, we know approximately 1,000, we've heard bits and pieces, but I don't think it would hurt to have that specifically. And I would like to hear more about why, if we should be considering the multipurpose room at the high school. I know that didn't make that in there, but there must be some data.
I just encourage you, when you have that staff data by school, that's also like by departments of our operations. There's some really interesting comments in there. There are comments about the conference rooms. There's comments about ice in forest. There are comments about, some on the bathrooms and things like that. Just so that you have seen all of what was brought forward, because that data, we're just got that to you more recently. I just want to make sure that
That's why we're not building ice at forest. It would cost us how many? 20 million, 30
I'm
million?
just telling you what I read.
And I think
I just want to make sure that we're aware of everything in those columns. What else do you think we missed?
Yeah.
Well, we asked for it, right?
So we did.
Reading it,
Yes.
Yeah. And I, just with the ice thing, I think the biggest thing that I mentioned, no one realized it was a package deal. I mean, it was an opportunity, as you mentioned, for us to be able to get what we needed, but certainly share in the cost.
Right.
And no one realized,
They understood that. It was,
No.
yeah. I mentioned that to somebody and they looked at me like I was speaking for it. I was
Yeah.
like, it was the first time they'd ever heard that.
Yeah.
That was the general sentiment at each of the small groups that was
they just didn't know. it was-
aware.
Yeah, they just thought we were throwing 5 million at something that it was gonna stick.
Do we have any information about like, let's say that wasn't a bond and it did pass, the timing of taxes being levied towards us versus the park district, would it be at the same time? Cause I mean, that was a big question people asked is like, if you tell me I'm getting this much, well, how much is the park district getting from me
Well,
for
this
this
was,
thing?
it'd actually be hockey was stuff. It's not the park project. It was the hockey actually got funded. I said the park district owns it. Park district.
Well, the park district was gonna share.
They're gonna be fine.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
I think from the cash flow conversations, since Utah keep looking at major gifts, it, you know, the bonds would be some of the first cash in the door.
Okay.
So I'd have to go back and look at the phasing plan, but I would think that that's expansion was in phase one as a way to seed the project because they wanted to get it moving. And I
Yeah.
would imagine that the vets would be as well. So whether I would say it is either likely that it would be in the same tax year or
Yeah.
one tax year apart, because it would be, you know, either school district and park district together or one after the other. And then the gifts as they roll in over generally a 3 to 5 year sort of matriculation cycle. But that would be sooner just from a cash basis.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, if the gifts didn't come in to meet that, then what? Just because I don't know.
Well, I mean, you could look no farther than Fargo Parks and, you know, their original plan for how much they were gonna fundraise, and they ultimately elected to sort of go increase the public participation side. I think that would have to be a conversation, you know, we would need to enter into sort of a master agreement with parks. We wouldn't own the facility. So ultimately, you know, it would be sort of upon them to make sure that their project is, you know, funded.
I just don't wanna, I don't see that happening.
Yeah,
but I just,
What I would envision happening is if one of the first things we would do would be to enter into, we did a tentative agreement with the parks and youth hockey. And there would need to be sort of a subsequent final one, which was more specific, which I would advocate for something, the cash flow thing would make sense so that we would be the first cash in the door. But if these project deliverables are not met by, you know, some period of time within 4 years, the park district would have to refund us any contribution that we make.
and then we would be on the hook for the 20 million addition to.
And then we'd now have $5 million and
We'd have seed money.
or figure out if we were gonna participate or not, or what that would look like. That would certainly would need to be
Or you could
discussed. I don't know.
practice during the school day.
Yeah, 5 million might be 6 million now with inflation, too. So I think that could be a part of the discussion as well.
Can you refresh our memory what we were talking for 100,000 for the 148 million for the, what were we figuring the dollar per?
The gaming thing is.
The full package, I believe, was 72.96 or 69.
Yeah.
So 72.60,
Yeah.
72.60 for 100 of those.
$72.
$70. Yeah, $70.
And that we need to keep telling people.
One piece of feedback or two pieces of feedback relevant to that I guess just to sort of do a temperature check. One would be to move away from picking arbitrary dollar amounts and just do 100,000 because some years we had done 1, 2, and 4. This last one, I think we did 1, 3, and 5. We received a lot of critical feedback that nobody owns a $300,000 house. The median home value is actually 316. So to just try to be more transparent in that, you know, take this number times the value of your home divided by 100,000. And this, you know, is what almost do a little more of the word problem as opposed to multiple iterations, which I thought would be more helpful for people, but that apparently caused more confusion.
Simple though, I mean, 100,000, 75,000,
then you should know.
Yeah, very.
It's amazing how much pushback We got on.
Oh, yeah.
And they asked for that. And
They
then-
did. They did. And then the other piece was we could probably be a little bit, as much as I like to be conservative, we can probably be a little less conservative in our taxable valuation growth projections. I mean, we really have only used 3% annually, and gosh, it's been a long time since we grew at 3%. So that would actually bring that number down slightly. So that would be one other thing when we look at sort of the various modeling scenarios with you all that I do think would have a positive impact where we were probably overstating the tax impact.
But even $72, $68, 71, I mean, I don't think that's gonna sway people. I mean, you're talking $10 compared to 100 maybe, but.
Yep, we're talking single digit % adjustments, but not voter determinant maybe.
When do you want this information? When do you want to have a conversation again?
Well, which do we want to talk about when we're thinking about what it looks like when we might go up for a bond vote? Because it won't be this year because the county can help us with that, right?
Correct, yep, they will not support any special elections in calendar year 24.
Okay. So we have some time.
Yeah.
Well, and what's the plan for communication so that it reaches the people? I mean, I know the yes vote group is a big portion of this, but also, did we learn anything, Heather, that was startling or?
Not in terms of the avenues that we use to communicate. We got really good feedback into the types of information that they want, right? Like I think, have historically been, how concise can we get it, right? Because we didn't want to bore people with the details. And I think what we heard a lot of this time is we got too concise and people wanted more specifics. So we got lots of really good feedback about here's the types of information that we would like to see. But there's really, unless we're going to start spending a lot of money, there's not a lot of other avenues that we can use to communicate. Sure. So we'll just continue to communicate in the same way that we have. But I do think that one of the big missing pieces in 23 was the lack of that really visual vote yes group, which I think will be very different this time around.
It is, sorry.
Sorry.
The yes group now, we have the Dwyers on it and Louise Dardis. The Dardises can get money, the Dwyers can get money, send out these mailers, because those mailers are expensive. For campaigning, it's like $3,000 just to send in to our District 13. So with those guys on it, I feel a lot more confident.
Well, then if we have time too. And whenever, if we have a
We won't
plan.
have too much time.
Well, that's what I was, because we could even started back to school. We had something, we could go to back to school and just keep that conversation going. Is that too early? I don't
I
know.
think it's too early.
But still have time to get, we want to make sure that we have those opportunities with larger group of people.
Right.
Have that conversation.
And again, tonight's your first night, so you don't have to have a firm answer, but do you want another opportunity to gather feedback? Or is the next time I'm going out with this conversation with all of you, we're talking about what's going to be on the bond referendum? Or do you want to have another opportunity? Okay, we've done more math, we've narrowed it down. This is what we're thinking. Is that what you're hoping for? Or are you seeing one more?
I feel like we need one more go round, because when I was talking with families, they would ask for the details. And I would say, we need to know what you're interested in first. And then we can, if you're not interested in it, we're not gonna invest manpower or women power.
It is a lot of manpower to do this.
Yep.
And to engage with.
Right.
Architect to make calculations and.
I don't think there's anything on the list, unless I'm wrong, that anyone was saying absolutely not, take that off the list. But I think the flexible seating
Could possibly have another revenue.
could have another revenue. What Tricia's on your list?
Oh, I was just saying that there were plenty of people that didn't want the ice,
Yeah. But the ice, I still think we have to have conversation around what especially if we could do it as a secondary one. If
Right.
we did it that way.
No, I'm,
Included in the package, I can get there rather than included in the package, and then people say no because of that.
Right.
So that's why I hate to exclude it.
Right.
Knowing we need it, but.
And when you're thinking about playgrounds, to what extent do you want to go?
right.
You want to do one or do you want to do 15, 16? You want to do quarter, half? So there's quite a bit of information you need from us to make those.
Because ultimately, it sounds like even if we had the playground, then the price is gonna go up. It's not gonna go down. I mean, without considering inflation and all the different things. I mean,
Right.
even if we added those, the price.
If we go to core academics, to Patty's point, start
Right.
there, that might at least keep it in the same ballpark as what we started at.
Right.
And then taxpayers can decide, I'm invested, I want it all, or
Or that can be a third option for those down the road we really like to see happen and put some of, I don't know, I just something to think about. I hate to exclude anything because I think everything on the list really had some support behind it. From all the meetings, there wasn't anything that absolutely became.
I think Jessica's point about sort of the 5 versus 10 years thing and how that could potentially be phrased as ballot questions is.
what I'm
something
wondering,
which is interesting.
could we put a calculator on the district webpage where people could type in their home value? And if they want to go for the core bond, the 10-year bond,
Yeah.
or the full blown
Yep.
bells and whistles,
Yep.
and they would see their direct impact.
Depending on what our, if the board, it's not that hard if the board basically.
NDSU has a whole like
Right.
department that they will develop apps like that for you to plug into your, I don't know if we.
I could figure out how to do the numbers. I think we just need to figure out what sort of our tech capacity is, and especially if the board, it would be not that complicated.
I was gonna say, isn't it an Excel sheet kind of, put in your home value?
Able to do it,
Yeah,
because mortgage calculator is what it is, and that's
Yeah.
pretty easy, so.
Big
Right.
Ed got it.
And I think it'd be easy. I think if the board took the position, one has to pass, and then, if we were to do 3, 1 and 2 have to pass, then there would really only be 3 numbers that people would need to understand.
Right.
So that
That
would be
would,
that.
I think we have to do it that way.
I just think it would be nice to see, I put in this value, level 1
Mhm.
is gonna cost me this much, level 2 is gonna cost me this much, and level 3 is gonna cost me this much.
Yeah.
I like that.
Levi, when do you have to have the language? How many days? 60.
Yes, the board has to authorize the special election 60 days. There are actually not a ton of really hard and fast legal timelines. Let me pull that up because I have this.
Should we continue to bring some of this stuff before P and D, before it comes back in a big group and kind of flush some of that stuff out and then come back together again?
Great
Because
idea.
I don't know why, I mean, anyone can come to P and D, but that gives an opportunity if you want to chunk this out, so it's not all at once.
And any of you can come to P&D.
Yeah, you're all
Even if you're not on the committee, and you don't have to either, but then you could get this some.
But I was just thinking as some of the stuff becomes available or you get done, so that way you don't feel pressured that we have to have all of it for, July 19, that as this comes available, or if we're not sure, or if we want to ask some more questions, that would be a great place to bring some of that stuff and we can bring it back and.
So, I mean, logistically, kind of figured out, if we were to go for a bond in 2025, the first half, when could we, would it be in March or when would, obviously it's got to be next year. I'm just trying to figure out how to count backwards, I guess. If that's the date, then here's the 60 days back where we do. And then of course, and then you start working back. Okay, that leaves us 3 months to get the,
Right.
or 4
For
months.
the where's that time frame?
Where's that time frame?
The first date, I mean, there's a lot of factors to consider.
Right.
When would it want to be had? But to Heather's good point, the first legal step is just 60 days. And then everything
Okay.
else of that is inside 60 days. So you could theoretically, if you pick, hey, we want to have it this day, as long as the board would authorize the resolution 60 days before that, you could do it 12 months before that. I mean, you have a lot of latitude on the early side.
Right.
That's the only legal constraint.
So we can have it as early as January.
In asking, and then, so it's 2 parts. What's our legal sort of timeline obligation? And then I did just ask sort of what availability or what blackout did they have in 2025? And they said beginning in mid-January on, they felt like they would have capacity to execute whenever we feel that it would be, right. And then Mark Lemaire would be the first to point out the closer you get to May 1, the more you lose the potential of the 25 construction season. So that's,
Yeah. That's why.
That's where I wanted to try to figure out, okay, what are we shooting for and back it up 60 days and,
Yeah.
and if they'll do it during those times, which you answered, after say January 15th and on or whatever.
Yeah, I would say,
Data says that the special election is more favorable than the general, correct?
yes, I think as far as where and how, especially if this general election has a ballot measure about eliminating property taxes altogether. then
Yeah,
that's
this one
another
especially is not a.
to consider.
For the first credit
don't
card
know that I would want to do it in January, just because you really want a crescendo at the end. And that would be crescendoing during the holiday break. And they-
I don't know that I'd like January anyway.
No.
I know this January was beautiful and I'm not taking, I'm not. I did mine. In good conscience, you just know that if you have weather, it would be bad. It would be bad.
So Patty, we did have an open-ended question in the survey asking if any of the board members had any other projects they wanted to discuss. And there was one response in there, so I just wanted to make sure that we.
Yep.
That was at least see future needs.
Oh, that was me.
Okay.
Because we didn't have a discussion about that at all. And so you're remiss to say, I can't imagine that everything is hunky dory here. We need no space. So.
Well, pretty soon this little room will split up, right? We can meet out here.
No,
Smaller
we
space.
need bigger rooms. We're doing our June 6th thing at the West Fargo Fire Department. We have things booked at Shields in their training room. We're at the dive bar. We're at Dakota Medical Foundation. We're at the Scouts.
Let alone Annie's
So
team.
I'm curious that when you're talking about those, Heather, what kind of money do we spend outside of our district for, but that doesn't help though. I mean, when someone says a lot, I mean,
$800 a day just for the room.
but if we know last
Can't
year what we
remember
spent, I think this is great for spend X number of dollars because we don't have, and what that looks like to, as a starting point to say, this isn't a want, this is really a need for the space, what that looks like. But I don't think that we've given any attention to this building or what our needs are going forward. And I think we have to do that and what that might look like. Now, might not happen this bond, but I can't believe we didn't ask the community to weigh in a little bit on that, so we could at least have the conversation.
The initial task force did weigh in on it.
They did, and they said no.
I mean, but again, I think that was with what, like a 80%
Threshold, yep.
threshold. So I mean, it was way above
But what did it
50 or
mean, though?
60.
Well, and here's the question. Pretty modest executive team. You guys aren't pounding the table saying, we need this.
Got new chairs. I mean, what more do we have?
I know, yeah.
It's really comfortable after 4 hours.
And so I could respect the heck out of the fact that you're putting the learners first repeatedly. However, if you don't have windows and your own mental health is tanking because you're not healthy, that also dramatically impacts our learners.
I don't know what the needs are, and I just think that
Annie, I love
we should at least have a conversation.
I was in my car.
I heard that. Yeah, no, I just, yeah.
Get enough sunshine. That was, we did present to our staff. So the accounting, the HR, the CNI, special ed, behavioral health, all the departments, business ethics, and it, they're all sitting in the back, they're sharing offices, they're sharing space.
We're doing what we have to.
And they're like, ask a question. It's just hard to put that out there when you know that you have these other needs, and so I appreciate the conversation.
I appreciate it. I just think that we don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what, outside of the large groups, what are the needs? And I think we should be open and upfront and have a conversation to say, is this really necessary or is this just frivolous?
Go back in
So-
technology and take a look.
Yeah.
I'll give you a tour.
The other place where
We
we
will see.
spend a lot of money, if anyone fills out their paperwork, is on travel, because it is not centrally located at all. As Annie can, like running from Horace all the way here, like it is not the middle. Although I think it is the middle
gonna say,
between Horace, but
Yeah.
The midpoint.
It is the midpoint of it.
the point of where our schools are currently.
Annie's team is not here, period. We have no space for a whole department, so,
We've always done more with less.
yeah. But it does come at a cost, which I think what you're saying too, Patty, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, Annie's travel, all of the PD spaces.
The PD space.
I think I realize how much we spend outside of, you just assume that it's all here. And I think if we can gather some of that information to say, this isn't, we're not frivolous.
It's true.
So I just think we need to find out what that looks like and if there's anything that can be done, and now's the time to do that. So.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I completely forgot that I put that on there. All right, is there anything else? It's 9:00. I hate to keep anybody any longer. Thank you.
Patty?
Oh, more.
You want,
Good.
did you want?
I don't think we need to.
Okay.
I was gonna say yes, but I don't think that this is, because now I'm gonna put don't need it instead of, because we have an answer. So I think we'll wait.
Okay,
Think
sounds
good
good.
action. Yep. With that, maybe we do an exit marks. Now I think I have more questions than answers. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, probably.
Thanks for telling me now.
Yeah, yeah.
Fan or something.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Patty and
We're back.
Jim, I do have one.
Yeah, I got it.